Okay, so this is an interview with Liz Truss, our shortest serving Prime Minister. I think it was 44 days she was in office. And yeah, this is a recent interview with her, kind of, I think, reflecting on her time as Prime Minister.
There are lots of different problems here, but what has happened is an orthodoxy has taken over British institutions in the same way as it's taken over European institutions. And that orthodoxy believes in mass migration, multiculturalism, toleration of Islamism, and we've seen appalling cover-ups of grooming gangs in Britain. You know, girls as young as 12 being systematically raped, and no national inquiry. It's been covered up. So there is a group of people who have essentially taken over our institutions with a particular worldview, and they don't want to be challenged.
Amazing. So this interview was given quite recently, reflecting on her 44 days as British Prime Minister between September and October 2022. Quite a lengthy interview. She goes into things in a lot of detail about her experiences as Prime Minister. Rob, what do we think about that feeling which she expresses that there's forces, like she calls it an orthodoxy, which have swept through the British institutions, changing what they had been previously? What is she getting at by that?
I think there's that recognition that people want something to be to blame. And they're looking at sort of the state of society around them. And the easiest thing to do, rather than recognise that actually, is it because it's a flawed, broken human society, is that no, there must be some force behind it. And here it's the orthodoxy in the institutions that corrupt it. If you look in America, it's the swamp of Washington, D.C. And again, the corruption there, that's what's broken society. But I think that what it fails to recognise is that it almost seems to say, like, well, this is a new thing that has happened, and before that, it was all perfect. And people go, if you go back to the 50s and 60s, it was brilliant back then. Or, well, maybe we need to go back further to the Victorian period and stuff. And I think there's this bizarre myth that we just need to go back to a better way of being. And there is some truth in that. But for a human society to flourish and to work, you'd have to go all the way back to Eden.
Yeah.
There has been no time where it hasn't been broken and flawed, where people haven't been selfish, where people haven't taken advantage of others. She's chasing after something that just can't exist without a radical recreation of the world. Yeah,
that great old Bishop of South India, Leslie Newbigin, described the 20th century as a century of rising expectations. What he meant was, he said that because, as nations in the Western world especially, we turned away from Jesus. Because of that, then we were putting more and more pressure, demands, expectations on governments, which meant that people were inevitably disappointed. Do you think that's a little bit of what's going on with this at the moment? Yeah,
kind of. I think, the truth is, and I see this in my own life, you try to trust people let you down, people are human. It's that whole thing of you will be disappointed. The only person that won't disappoint you is Jesus. And so if you are looking for this perfect government, you're not going to find it. As Rob said, you go far back and you're like, well, they were rubbish. You go further back, you're like, well, that time was rubbish. Even during Jesus's time, they were ruled by the Roman Empire. You go before that, even the kings of Israel, they were doing terrible jobs, because it's all humans. You're going to be disappointed. I'm sure I disappoint people in my life, and so if it's not Jesus, it is disappointment.
Yeah, but this pattern which she's identifying at the moment, Rob, in terms of what you might say internal collapse, institutions changing in how they operate, what they're about and things, but then at the same time external pressures that are coming to bear on those things, those patterns have been recognized by historians as happening in other countries at different times. Do you think we're seeing at the moment, what's being articulated here and what we're seeing at the moment, is the playing out of older patterns which have happened elsewhere, internal weakness and then external pressure, and that it is a spent civilization which is coming to an end?
I think there is that sense that it's very reminiscent of things like the fall of Rome, and that idea of the collapse of any sense of belief, of any kind of rules or restrictions. But I think it's so reminiscent of things that have happened again and again in British history. If you look back to sort of the miners' strikes in the 1970s and the struggle and the pressure it put on our civilization as we go through that kind of post-industrial phase, I think what people are finding is that this sort of postmodern Western democracy has been held up as the perfect form of government, and it's going to bring freedom and wealth and prosperity to everybody, without recognizing that actually it's going to rely on some people not winning, on some people struggling, of some people not having enough. And it's never going to bring us the kind of fairness, because the human beings who are running it aren't fair, aren't perfect. And so I think we are just doomed to repeat this cycle, to go through that sort of period of massive restructuring and reorganization, that springtime as everybody goes, oh, this is new and different, and then the slow realization that actually this is just as corrupt as what went before.
And it's funny, though, all this is happening at the top, we might say, Westminster, the House of Commons, all that sort of stuff, and it does feel quite bleak, and a lot of people when they look into that think, wow, this is not terribly encouraging as to what's happening at the moment. So that's what's happening at the top, but then on the ground, we might say there's a different story being played out, isn't there, Karis? Lots and lots of people are coming into church for the very first time. So I was talking to a friend this morning who said a church near him, they had 50 people until a couple of months ago. They've not done anything differently. Now they've got over 200 coming every week. Heard of another church in the north of England. They had 150 people become Christians recently, just a couple of weekends ago in Bournemouth. It made BBC News. There was 92 people baptized on the beach. So is there some kind of disconnect between what's happening at the top, failure, sort of identifying all kinds of patterns and pressures that they seemingly can't deal with, but on the ground, lower down, exciting things are happening.
I don't know if it's necessarily top bad, bottom good, because I'm sure there's terrible things happening at the bottom as well and good things happening at the top, but I do think it kind of just shows that even if the top isn't going well or it's a bit depressing, that doesn't stop Jesus from moving with the people on the ground. It doesn't stop Jesus moving. So I think there are going to be times, because the world is broken, where there are a lot of bad things going on, scandals, hurt, all of these kind of things going on. But it's not to say that during that same time that there can't be lives saved and people finding true joy in Jesus.
Yeah, absolutely. And as that's happening on the ground, let's say, and people are coming into church for the very first time and coming to know Jesus and being born again and coming into his life, how do you think that's likely, Rob, to play out in terms of what happened in Westminster, the House of Commons? How do you give it to months, years, how's that likely to play out?
I don't think it can not make a difference. The whole point of Westminster is that it is representative, and so when they're faced with the sort of the challenges in our society at the moment, politicians can go one of two ways. You can do that sort of we will reach for the edges, and then you see that with parties like Reform, and there's and Liz Truss did in that video. The problem is migration, so we need to try and close the borders, keep everybody out. But that's happened before, and it's not made any difference. And it recognises, actually, it ignores the challenges we have in our society. We need more people. We need babies. There's a massive shortage of people being born. We need people to maintain our ageing population. But I think there's also that danger that they reach the other side and go, well, actually, anything goes. We're going to have no restrictions whatsoever. So we're just going to go for, liberalisation of absolutely everything in the hopes that if we remove the restrictions, that will remove the problem. But again, those are all searching for human solutions. Hopefully, as we see these people responding to the greatest story that's ever been told, politicians will start responding to that too, and recognising that actually what we need is politicians who model that Christ-like nature of loving God and loving neighbour, recognising that actually there is more to life than this, and that only by following that path is there any hope for civilization.
Yeah, when somebody because we can dismiss things and just say, oh, it's only alarmist, it's not serious, or we can say these things have happened many times before. But I think when somebody who has been Prime Minister, even for a very short time, says that the UK's fall is irreversible, that's quite a serious thing. And then when Rishi Sunak said similar things, and then Sir Keir Starmer saying in his own way very similar things as well. Karis, are there instances in the past in British history when it's felt as if things were coming towards the edge of a cliff and that the only way was downward, but actually that things have been brought back, and how has it been brought back?
Gosh, you're testing my British history, which out of the three of us, I probably know the least. But I mean, even just to go on the world wars, there were world wars, that's just not British. That's the world. That was pretty bad. Like, I think almost every school learns about them, even if you're not in the UK. But we still see some like happy moments even in those. Like, I don't know if you guys did this in school, but we did the Christmas Day where they played football together. And it's one, but like, it's kind of what it represents, where it's like, yes, all of this is going on, but at the end of the day, we are all just humans. Like, we do all find the same things difficult and find the same things happy. We're all just humans. And so, like, obviously after the World War, devastating families, but like, you rebuild, you band together. COVID, I don't have to test my history for that. That was only a few years ago. I'm sure they'll look back in history and be like, oh, remember that time? COVID, like, devastating. A lot of people really struggled, like loss of family members, loss of affected mental health, like so many things. You don't need me to list them all. But I do think there were a lot of moments where it brought people together. How do we support our community? Like, churches, like, actually finally reaching out into the community. Like, I know a lot of churches do, but there are a lot of churches that tend to think, people got to come to us. In COVID, they couldn't. So actually being like, okay, how do we reach out to them? How do we support our community? Neighbors being like actually loving their neighbor, maybe finding out what their name is for the first time. And just, I think, humanity deep down does want to band together and support each other during crisis. But I think sometimes before that happens, because I think like in COVID that affected everyone, rich, poor, like, you couldn't really escape it. Obviously it affected people differently, but you couldn't escape it. And I think sometimes when there are certain things that maybe don't affect certain people, that's when they don't want to band together. That's when they don't want to support each other. I don't really know what your question was. Sorry, I went on a little tangent there.
No, it was a good answer, Karis, wasn't it? It was Karl Marx who said that, he identified the modern era that we live in now. Well, modern, postmodern. I think it's all the same thing, really, as being the French Revolution, 1792. And when that happened, there was like a terrible bloodbath opened up in Paris with Robespierre and all those like terrible things. Charles Dickens, talked about it, The Tale of Two Cities, what was going on in Paris and what was going on in England at the time. It was fascinating that even like non-Christian historians said that the reason that England didn't, and Britain more widely, didn't degenerate into this bloodbath was because of what was called the Great Awakening and the Wesleys, Wesleys and Whitfield. So in other words, it was the Christian church and what was happening at that point up, which brought it back from the brink. When we look at the history of Wales, so not widely as Britain, just the history of Wales, are there any examples, Rob, of the church like going down, the nation going down, it feeling as if it was coming to a cliff edge and there was no way back, but then the church being brought back to life again? Give us some examples of that to encourage us as we look towards the future.
Well, obviously, Wales is often known as the land of revivals, and it's happened repeatedly in its history. Obviously, they played a huge part in that Great Awakening, in the Methodist revival, and that recognition of the rediscovery of individual sin, of individual salvation, of the need to commit to Christ, and the difference that made in Wales as a nation with the chapel movement. And then you get that at the turn of the 18th to 19th century. But you get it again at the beginning of the 20th with the Great Revival in 1904, and this outpouring of belief as Wales is transformed right at the end of the Industrial Revolution. But I think it's really interesting that as you move through the 20th century, as people are wrestling with that identity, we have the world wars, we have the collapse of so much of Wales' traditional industry, with the closing of the mines, the change of Merthyr Tydfil being the heart of steel production in the world, dropping to essentially nothing. And so as Wales is sort of rediscovering itself, it's looking for meaning and purpose. And a lot of that is found in its history and its culture and the sort of the explosion of the Welsh language and Welsh poems and Welsh songs. But faith is at the heart of that. And I think when we look at like the modern society, if you look round, the capital city, Cardiff today, so much of what is going on is inspired and led by churches. If you look at the food banks, if you look at warm spaces, if you look at children, toddler groups, youth groups, the church plays a massive role in supporting our communities because that central organizational structure doesn't and can't. It's crazy that in a modern Western democracy, so many people are fed by a faith organization rather than by the state. That so many toddler groups and youth groups are run by a faith organisation, not by the council.
Yeah.
Because they just can't. Our construction of the state, which is what Liz is pointing at, has become so big and so convoluted and so tied in knots about what's acceptable and what isn't, that it's very difficult to achieve anything. Whereas in an organisation like the church, where you're just surrounded by people, it's unavoidable.
Yeah, it's very good, isn't it? In human terms, who knows? Is the UK's fall irreversible? Maybe yes, maybe no, who knows? But God, and with divine possibilities, and we've seen again and again that in the past, Jesus has brought the church back from the brink and brought whole nations back from the brink and back to life again.
Yeah.
And each one of us coming back to church, coming back to Jesus, trusting him, following him, who is the Lord God of Wales. Like, this country could be rebuilt, couldn't it? Come to its brightest days, can still be ahead, and Britain as well. So the collapse, the fall, isn't inevitable. Let's turn back to Jesus.
Amen.
And find that a new chapter begins for us all.